Welcome to Behind Closed Books, the podcast where business owners and experts reveal the financial decisions that shape their success. Each episode brings you unscripted stories of turning points, hard calls, and the numbers that changed everything to pivot, recover, and grow. If you're building a business and ready to think differently about profit, pressure, and progress, behind every smart decision is a story worth telling. This is the show. Here is your host, Craig Sheets.
Happy New Year, everybody. I might be too late in the year to say Happy New Year, but you don't know when this was recorded. We'll just say it's Happy New Year's anyways. Hope everybody's doing good. I wanted to welcome you to another episode of Behind Closed Books. My next guest today, very interesting background and role he has. He's held various roles in the accounting field. Currently, he's the CFO of a second-generation fire safety and protection company with just under $20 million in revenue. It's a good-sized company. The company takes on various types of clients. Of course, they do fire, and we'll learn more about it, safety and protection. So a big part of their revenue, surprisingly, actually, when I first heard this, comes from recurring inspection services. So a lot of times people have buildings, I guess they need to be re-inspected every year to make sure it's up to code. With that will obviously come some repairs, 10% or so off of that. Obviously they inspect it. They're going to find repairs that are needed. And then they have fire prevention and massive installations of jobs when someone needs to start a new building. He's also very adept at accounting. He had a big series of complex reports that he had to take possession of when he first came over in the job, and he made them very easy to understand and legible to the management role. So they're very appreciative of that. So that must have taken a lot of work. Personally, he's an active reader, very philosophical, and works writing high level on humanity and the arts. Really excited for everybody to meet. Today's my next guest is Zach Roper. Welcome to Behind Closed Books, Zach.
Thanks, Craig. I'm glad to be here.
So we're going to talk about a lot of things today. I thought I'd kind of go through high level what we're going to talk about, and then we can get right into it. So I think the first thing, and we'll go back to this, but the first thing we need to talk about is just more about the fire prevention and safety industry. And we'll talk about that in a second, because I think people hear it and they probably say, yeah, I know what that is, but I bet they probably really don't know all that goes involved in it. So it'd be good to hear from you. And then kind of do a deep dive from an accounting perspective, maybe more about the importance of your reporting in your industry specifically and how it interrelates to GAAP, the generally accepted accounting principles. And if you have any kind of adherence to percentage of completion method, maybe you start a project in December, but don't finish it in January. If you get the money ahead of time or after the fact, you use accrual or accounting-based accounting. Tax implications in your industry. I mean, I'm sure it's like other companies, there's going to be tax implications. And then what's the latest trends in your industry? There's got to be a lot of trends that are happening right now, especially with AI. I don't know if you have robots putting out fires. We'll find that out later maybe, but let's start off with, tell me more about the fire prevention and safety industry. Just kind of talk me through that.
Yeah, definitely. So, as you said, I think there's a lot of people who have a concept of what fire safety is. What it is in practice is both more interesting and kind of more boring than you would expect. So, I would say there's three levels to our business. Part of it is just routine inspections. So, when you think about all of the commercial buildings that exist in even a small city like Cleveland, which is where we're based, every single one of those commercial buildings has to adhere to a certain level of fire safety. So what we do, what my company does, is all on the prevention side. So we'll go out, we'll inspect and make sure your alarm systems are working. So think of like a fire drill when you were in school. Someone pulls the code and then you've got these, huge horns and lights, right? Well, those actually all have to trigger appropriately in the event that there's a fire hazard. So what we'll go out is and municipal schools is a big winner for everyone in the fire safety space. So they have fire extinguishers. You have to have a certain number of fire extinguishers in the school per square foot. You have to have a certain number in the kitchen. We go out, we inspect the fire extinguishers. So every 6 years, an extinguisher needs to be completely discharged and recharged. Every 12 years, it has to do.
Wait, are you saying fire extinguishers have expiration dates?
Well, not exactly expiration dates. It's just you want to test it and make sure it's in working order in case you need it. So we work on old.
Use it as once you test it, is it blow the whole thing off, or is it still usable after you test it?
No. So that's part of what we do. So you actually discharge it as part of the 6-year maintenance. You actually discharge the entire extinguisher. We capture all the chemical into a bin, and then you recharge it. So you double check and make sure that it's going to hold the pressure, and then you refill it with new chemical. And then every 12 years, you actually have to take it into the shop and you have to fill it with water. It's called a hydro test, and so that makes sure that the canister is in working order. And this is just one small part of our
Yeah,
business.
I
This is
jumped
just
to that. Sorry, I was excited about fire extinguishers. Keep going. I apologize.
So we do that, and then think of an alarm system for a school. Well, someone pulls a fire alarm in the whole school. That you have the flashing lights and that display that glare, and they're called horn strobes. So we go through and we'll actually go to schools and we'll test and we'll say, okay, well, if you have a fire that triggers in the cafeteria, will the system trip and will all your horn strobes work? If we go in and we find a faulty horn strobe, it's like, hey, we have to replace that. You have to wire a new one in, check the panel, make sure it's going to work. So that's another level of our business, is just inspecting fire alarm systems. And then of course you have sprinkler systems, depending on what you're doing. This is really common in manufacturing. It's really common in industries where you have a high fire safety risk. You actually have to have a suppression system. All restaurants have to have a suppression system over their kitchen. And so if the kitchen catches on fire, it dumps a foam or a chemical or gas or whatever system you have, and extinguishes a fire.
Sorry, I got these are. I think I'm asking on behalf of the listeners too. So I always think in a kitchen, the actual heat of the kitchen's got to be so warm. I would think, isn't there like little glass bubbles that melt, and that's what causes the water to come down from the sprinkler systems? Is that the trigger?
In a normal sprinkler system, yes, you have a little glass trigger on the actual sprinkler head, and that can either melt or it can be broken. And if either of those happens, it triggers the sprinkler system. And it's not really like you see in the movies where the guy like holds the flame up and then the whole building starts sprinkling. That'd be a massive deluge system. We probably never install one of those. But you think about like a high rise in Chicago, there, a whole floor might be a deluge floor. It's not going to trigger the whole building, but it might trigger the entire floor to prevent the fire from spreading. So that's basically the basics of the fire prevention industry. So we want to make sure your extinguishers are working. We want to make sure your alarm systems are working. And then if you have a sprinkler or a suppression system, we would do all of that work. And all of the work that we do is on the prevention space. We want to make sure that if there's a fire, it doesn't become worse. We don't do any restoration. We don't do any post, we don't do any active fire rescue, although we do work very closely with the fire department. And oftentimes, just because of the type of clients that we have, the fire marshal will actually come out and they'll, if we installed a new system, we have to do what's called an acceptance test. The fire marshal and a building inspector will come out and they'll observe that test and be like, okay, yes, this system is, working as intended. So that's the industry. And it's funny because when I went into this job, I actually started with this company as a consultant. They brought me on full time after a couple months, and I was like, how complicated could it be? And it's not super complicated, but it's highly technical.
Right. So I would think, because when you think of fire prevention, you think, okay, well, there's a fire extinguisher, and then there's some places have the sprinklers, and everything's, well, what if somebody like cracks the glass by accident? The whole system's gonna flood the whole building, like you said. Is that gonna happen? Or if you're in a kitchen and it gets too hot because you've got the broilers going, it's gonna set off the whole restaurant, and people eating food outside are gonna get soaked. But it sounds like there's different systems. Some are like deluge. Oh, that's a good tough word to say. Deluge.
Yeah, deluge. Yeah, deluge system. So yeah, actually, funny enough, with the restaurants, usually they have separate systems. So you'll have a system that'll be responsible for your like dining area, and then you'll have actually like a kitchen. It's called a kitchen hood system. So if there's a huge fire that's like a grease fire that like explodes up into your hood, the hood will detect the fire and deploy the prevention just in the kitchen. So you don't set off the whole restaurant if you have a grease fire.
Probably it's Bruce Chris getting soaked with my steak while the kitchen's on fire.
So, but that's the industry. And I could talk for days about what kinds of projects we do and, why it's necessary. But
So do you ever individuals? Like, in other words, like that someone has a big house or a mansion and they want to have some kind of fire suppression. And if so, is it just fire extinguishers or is it the smoke alarms? Is also can you have sprinklers inside of a house? The sprinkler things in a house?
The short answer is yes. I mean, we could install a fire alarm system in any building that has enough electricity, and since most houses are plugged into the grid, you could pull enough electricity to have a fire system. We don't do residential work. It's interesting because when I started working at this company, I had two fire extinguishers in my home. One larger one that was kind of in my garage, and one smaller one that was in the door to my basement right next to my kitchen. And I took those into the office and I was like, hey, can you guys just inspect these and make sure they're working? And they're looking at me like, they're like, these extinguishers are so old, we're actually not allowed to work on them anymore because the chemical they used prior to 1983, you're not allowed to use anymore. And so they swapped me out. They told me how to properly dispose of my old extinguishers. If you have to do that, by the way, you have to discharge them. You can't throw a pressurized extinguisher away, but you can discharge it just into a trash bag. You cover the hose with a trash bag. You discharge it into a trash bag, then you can throw it out. But no, we don't really do residential work. Ours is more, businesses, shops, schools.
That keeps you busy enough. So now that's a good lesson for everybody. Check your fire extinguishers. I'll just say that to all the listeners today.
And also, just as a personal fire safety, you should probably have at least a couple fire extinguishers in your home. I have it's a 2.5 pound extinguisher in my kitchen. So if my kitchen catches on fire, and then I have a 5 pound dry chemical extinguisher, and get an ABC extinguisher. That's what they're called. There are 3 different types of fires you can put out with them. And I have a 5 pounder out near my grill, and then I have a 10 pounder in my bedroom, because if you're caught in your house and you have to fight your way out of the house, you want your biggest extinguisher the furthest away from your door. And so I have a big one in my bedroom, a medium one by my grill, and a small one in my kitchen.
I think we've done a good PSA today, the public service announcement. I think that is right there alone is huge. But fire prevention, like I said, I think it's a lot more than people think. They think, oh, it's just a fire alarm in my house and a fire extinguisher. But no, commercially, they're so robust. So it's really interesting to learn about that, how much is involved.
It's a big industry. It's a very big industry.
It's got to be massive. Now, switching over to my side, I'm going to our side. From an accounting standpoint, from a reporting and in your business yourself specifically, because I imagine for bigger companies versus, you're a pretty large size company, I'd say, but is there anything you have to do special for GAAP or for accrual versus cash basis? I guess the one thing I'm thinking of off the top of my head, imagine you mentioned, or I mentioned above, or you told me, I think 24 or 20 odd percent of your, maybe no, 10% of it, sorry, was massive installs. Let's say you started an install on December 1st, but it was so big you couldn't finish it till the middle of January. From a revenue perspective, you might get money up front and money at the end. Is there like a percentage of completion method, or do you have to use accrual? I'm kind of curious about that side. I know it's kind of specific, but
yeah. So obviously, being a small family-owned company, we use a modified GAAP basis. So we adhere to GAAP for regular accruals like wages, payroll, PTO, etc. We do actually do a percentage of completion. This is something I started to change when I came in. So we do a percentage of completion. Right now, we're just doing it for year end for 25. Going forward, we're going to do it on a month by month basis. And so usually you've kind of hit the nail on the head. We'll go and let's say we sell a new installation for an alarm system. That could be anywhere from a 2-week to a 2-month job. We actually have a huge job coming up that's going to be a 2-month installation. And so what we do is we do a milestone percentage of completion. We usually will bill part of it up front to cover our cost of materials, because we'll have to order materials for these big jobs. And then we recognize revenue. So once we get the design done, that's a milestone for us. We incur costs for our designer to actually design the system. Then you have to get a permit for the system. You have to get it approved by the city. So those are all like front load milestones. And then you go out, you actually do the install. That's a huge chunk of your work. That's where you start chewing up your materials. And then once we're finished with the install, we usually say we're about 90 to 95% done, depending on the size of the job. And then the final step is what's called an acceptance test. So you'll have the fire marshal come out, you'll have a building inspector, or usually a building manager, come out. And then once the acceptance test passes, it means everything's working as normal. The fire marshal will sign off on it, and we'll recognize the last bit of our revenue. So we do a milestone percentage of completion. And it's just kind of interesting. I've talked to CFOs at larger fire protection companies. Obviously, who owns your company and who you're beholden to impacts your reporting a lot. My boss, she sits next to me, and the owning family are the two offices next to mine. So that's who I report to. And for us, the biggest focus is on cash management and taxes, right? We want to make sure we've got everything accurately reported for the IRS. But, if you're working for a much larger, private equity owned shop, they're going to care a lot more about GAAP reporting, a lot more about the KPIs and so on and so forth. So we're under 20 million. We're trying to climb up to that 20 million in revenue. I would say, this year, next year, we'll see kind of how we do in terms of growth, because there's a lot of drivers that impact that. And then, assuming, well, our owners have been pretty candid about not being interested in selling the company. So for us, it's like, okay, we're going to report as accurately as we can for taxes. We don't even keep like the tax versus, accounting books. We just keep one set of books that we're doing for tax right now.
Also, you're doing tax AJE. So after you, and I'll say this to the people that are listening to you. So after the tax returns file, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, what they're doing then is they're basically taking journal entries for things such as whether it's depreciation. It wouldn't be meals. It'd be the temporary items, not permanent. So it'd be things like meals. No, sorry, for depreciation, amortization. Maybe there's an interest differential, whatever it would be, where you're what they call them M1s on page 4 or 5, depending on the type of entity you are. Under this section called M1, you're going to have these reconciliation adjustments. So then after that's done, you have to turn those and journalize them into a tax AJE, and then to bring them back into the year before. So you have a tax set of books. I said it to everybody else. I was talking through you to them. So I just kind of making sure they got that.
And our biggest M1 item usually is like meals and entertainment, because we'll write all of that off on our books. And then it comes tax time, and the IRS is like, you can only deduct half of that. And so it's like, okay, great. Well, there's an M1 deduction.
During COVID, they were so generous. They gave before COVID, it was 50%. Then during COVID, they were 100%. Everybody's like, yes, we're going to eat all the time. And then you put something off, you're like, yeah, we're going to Ruth's Chris. Here we go. And then COVID ended. You're like, oh man, we're back to 50% again. What the heck? That's
Yeah, that was a blip. But yeah, so that's how we report. It changes company to company, ownership to ownership. And then of course you have some big publicly traded fire safety companies, and obviously they have to adhere, strictly to US GAAP for, big public company reporting. And I would say we're probably 75% there. Obviously, we maximize the tax depreciation as much as we can. When we buy new assets, we do bonus depreciation rather than just straight line, and stuff like that. But we do try to keep it pretty close with the accruals. We try to make sure that we're recognizing expenses in the period they're incurred, and we do at least a year end. Right now, we're going to do a percentage of completion revenue recognition adjustment. That's something my accounting manager is working on right now.
Two things on that. I know the bonus depreciation is back because they were phasing it out over time. They call it sunsetting. It's a fancy, don't know why they call it sunsetting, but they're sunsetting out, to a point. And then Trump got in office, and then he said, right, we're bringing it back. But it was very strange how he brought it back. Everyone's like, all right, great, it's back as of January 1st. He's like, no, I'm going January 13th or whatever it was, my inauguration day. So anything from, I think it's the 13th, I could be wrong, but January 1st to January 12th, you bought something, it doesn't count because you went from inauguration day. I have never, and I've been doing this for a while, ever seen a tax code go in effect based on the inauguration date of a president before.
Well, good thing for us, we bought all of our new vehicles after January 13th, so we're taking our bonus depreciation.
And then bonus depreciation helps companies a lot. I mean, because when you're used to, it's like I was going to make an analogy to National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Like having a bonus every year, your family relies on it. The company relies on it every year. I don't know why I referenced that one scene, but the family relies on it. They need that. And if they get it taken away and they're used to it, let's say they did planning 2 years ago or 3 years ago when it was in place, and then it got sunsetted out. Well, that's going to affect your budget. It's going to affect your projections and your revenue stream, your tax implications. So,
well, and you think about it too, for a bunch of these family-owned companies, they're just LLCs or maybe an LLC filing as an S corp. Most of them aren't C corporations, because why would you pay the double taxation when you take money out of your business? And so that bonus depreciation, that impacts, that really impacts your earnings at the end of the year for these small family-owned businesses, Because if I can buy if it's going to cost me $75,000 to buy a new transit van and have it outfitted for all the things that we need to go out to a regular job, and you can only depreciate $7,000 of that versus 31,000 of it, which I think is the max on the Section 179 this year. That's a pretty significant difference, especially if you multiply it across 2, 3, 5, 10 vans.
It's huge, and that I'm so glad you brought that back. So for tax planning purposes, we're glad bonus is back. And it sounds like from you did a great job doing benchmarks for an industry that's so challenging and new to you. You did the insulation benchmarks. I'm really impressed when you said that. That's a great ad you did to the company for the percent.
Yeah, we actually had a long meeting with our managers who do the systems design and implementations, and we were talking through, okay, should we recognize on 4 milestones? We actually came up with 10. There are 10 things that we do on almost every project, and the first 3 kind of go together, because as soon as you finish a design, you submit it for a permit and so on and so forth. So usually you won't have a cutoff there where it's like, okay, well, we've got a design but not a permit yet. We have a couple of those projects across year end, but you get those kind of front load things done. You recognize 25-30% of your revenue, then you send your labor out, you use all your materials and your labor costs, so that pushes you way up on your recognition.
Wow, that's great you did that, because a lot of times people come in, they're like, yeah, we're just going to recognize that as we go, and you think, well, not every industry is the same, and yours is very specialized where you need to have benchmarks, and that's great. You recognized it, but not only that, you actually implemented it. So good job on that one. That's a big feather in your cap. Now, from a tax standpoint, we talked about that. Really, we were going to make that a separate topic, but you do your accounting modified accrual. Sounds like you do your books and tax method. So you're obviously reporting depreciation, meals, all that are being reported back on books. And entity type is what it is. Whether it's either really, I mean, it only makes sense to be a partnership or S corp, because if you have C corp, you're paying double tax.
Right. Like, why would you ever do that if you're not trying to be a publicly traded corporation? I just wouldn't understand it.
Everybody's like, oh, it's great, I got 20% tax rate, or what 21 or 20% tax rate, 20%, and we're saving money. But yeah, now on the back end, it doesn't make any sense, because you're double taxing on all your dividends and distributions, and everything's taxable. It just doesn't make any sense. So the tax side of things is what it is. You have the S corporation or whatever. It doesn't matter the entity type, but you basically have your entity type, and money's coming in. You're doing percentage of completion. Check the box for modified accrual on page 2, if I have it right. I think section B. I got to remember that exactly on top of my head. But that's great. Yeah. So it sounds like you have it all handled and working through. Do you have a special accounting software you use for your company, or is it QuickBooks?
No, we just use QuickBooks. Company was on QuickBooks. They were on a QuickBooks desktop when I got there. I one of the things I did was move us to QuickBooks Online. I don't want anything to be server bound to the office anymore, which is something where we have fought a lot with in my tenure, is trying to tech up and get us away. And it's funny because I always use this analogy as a fire safety company. I'm like, guys, if our building catches on fire and our servers go up in flames, we lose literally all of our company data. Like, it's all stored there. So we've started to get away from that. But yeah, QuickBooks Online, I've used a bunch of ERPs. QuickBooks is not my favorite, but we're not big enough to justify something like a NetSuite or a BlackLine or even an SAP. So
Oracle is one. Is that Oracle? Yeah, I'm trying to think of the ones.
Oracle owns NetSuite. I like NetSuite a lot. I've worked for several companies that have used NetSuite. I think it's a good user-friendly software. It's very expensive though, and QuickBooks is very reasonably priced.
And it's interesting because a lot of people look, they think, oh, we can do Zero, or we could do what's the other ones out there besides that, FreshBooks or whatever. It's like they don't have the robust features you need. Then you go to QuickBooks, and then as you get bigger, you think, well, QuickBooks doesn't have the features I need to go to Oracle. But as you make these changes, you're talking thousands and thousands of dollars in differential, and you have to do a conversion from one software to another for software as a service. But as long as it's in the cloud and it's user friendly, I think QuickBooks does a lot more than most softwares that software does.
There's a reason they've kind of cornered that small business market. I know Sage competes pretty hard with QuickBooks, but QuickBooks it dominates the small business market for a reason. And I think it's just because it really provides what you need, and it's not the most complicated software out there by a long shot.
No, it's great. It's good to use. It's good software. It works for a lot of people, so it's good you're using that. Yeah, it sounds like you have everything wrapped up really tight on the accounting side. Is there any other things from from an accounting perspective that's unusual to your industry? I imagine you have employees that work there. You got vans. You got rent and
I wouldn't say anything really abnormal. We don't do anything. We don't do any derivatives or any hedging. Most of what we're doing is just trying to understand, what benefits can we offer, right? And a big budget item for us was we came up to renew our health insurance, and our provider came back and was like, "Hey, your premium is going to go up 17%." I'm like hell it is, dude. We're going to go shop. And we did. We shopped. We looked at a bunch of different providers. We got an offer from another provider, and we went back to our current provider and said, "Hey, look, this is the offer we got from our other provider." And they were like, "Okay, just kidding, your increase is going to be 0." We were like, "Yeah, thank you very much." And so we were so stressed. And that's one of our biggest cost centers. Obviously, I think with most companies that are in the fire protection space, most of your costs are going to be employee related costs, salaries, benefits, etc. And outside of salaries, healthcare is, for us, and I think for most companies, one of our biggest expense items. So if you tell me, one of the biggest items on my P&L is going to increase 20%, as a CFO, I feel like I would be negligent to not go to market and be like, "Look, guys, someone's got to help us out here."
yeah, heads are going to roll. There's no way that's going to happen. And it's good. It shows you as a
My head is going to roll if I let that happen.
it's good as a company though that you guys look out for your people. A lot of times people are like, "Well, we don't provide healthcare, or maybe we're gonna pass on all the cost to our employees. We don't care." And it shows that you guys are a very conscientious company caring about something like that, and you're not just passing along all the costs to them, and you're helping subsidize. So that's
Our owners have worked really, really hard to improve the employee culture at our company, make sure that we're offering fair benefits. But this is one of my favorite things. So we're getting ready to do year-end bonuses, and we're looking at the P&L, and we're trying to establish a bonus pool. And I'm thinking, okay, we'll do bonuses the end of the year. We'll pay them out in February or March. And the owner's like, "No." He's like, "We're going to pay them out on December 5th. I'm like, "What? Why?" He's like, "Because it's a Christmas bonus. I want people to be able to pay for, use their Christmas bonus for Christmas." So that was really cool. I mean, yeah, from an accounting standpoint, I'm kind of scratching my head, and from a cash flow standpoint, I'm like, well, that's a lot of money to just send out right before the end of the year. But I'm very fortunate as a CFO. We have a very healthy balance sheet. We've got a great cash conversion cycle, and so it's not something that I was like, basically issuing a whole extra payroll before year end didn't really cause me any stress. But I loved the approach of the owners being like, "No, if I'm going to give someone a Christmas bonus, I'm going to give it to them before Christmas." And I was just like, wow, that to me spoke volumes about what they're trying to do for the employees.
The people on your company obviously are conscientious. They care about their employees. They're not just there to take advantage. That's amazing. And it ties back to the thing I said earlier about Christmas vacation with the bonus. What kind of person gives a bonus and he does that rant for like 30 seconds? I don't know why I referenced that, but it came out to be full circle in that one. That's funny.
Yes, it did.
So I don't even know if I'm bringing this up right, but from an AI or technology standpoint, sorry, I picked up a little bit of a cold. Has there been any, I don't know, rapid or major changes? I know you're on the accounting side more on the back end, but not sure if you know of anything on the front end. Is there any kind of AI or technology advancements that are really coming down strong in the industry you're in for the pipeline?
Yeah, I think recently one of the biggest pushes has been inspection reporting. So when I think about, so fire extinguishers are kind of simple, because when I inspect a fire extinguisher, I hang a tag on the gauge, and it says who the company is, who the tech was, what day and date did we inspect it, and was there anything that we noted. And so you just hang that tag there. Anyone can come by, look at a fire extinguisher. And this is funny, because when I started working for this company, now every time I see a fire extinguisher like out in the wild, I like go check the tag. I'm like, did we tag this one, or did someone else tag this one? And my fiance, or my wife, is so funny about it, because she'll see me like walking around the corner. She's like, "Did you find a fire extinguisher?" I'm like, "Look, I just wanted to know who I'm competing with in this market."
Something you never did before. That's funny.
No, and gas stations because gas stations have to have a fire extinguisher. I think every other like pump aisle, you have to have a fire extinguisher. Every time I fill up in the Cleveland area at a gas station, I'm peeking around like, where is your fire extinguisher and who tagged it?
I'm going to be looking that next time I go to a gas station to see if they have that. That's great.
But when you're inspecting like a big fire system for like a school, or if you're doing like a big sprinkler system in a factory, you have to document your inspection really thoroughly. And so there's been a big tech push to make that easier, because even some of our larger competitors, until I would say a couple years ago, a lot of people were still doing handwritten inspection reports. You upload them, you scan them into the computer, you upload them to usually a city. Every city will have like a portal that you will upload your inspection to say, hey, we went out to X building on X date and we inspected their system and these were the results. And then so that's been a big tech push, and something we're working really hard on is to kind of digitize that. And there have been a couple companies that have gone in and started to do that. So that's one of our big tech initiatives for this year, is to get all of our inspection reporting onto one of these systems, streamline it for the 21st century. AI is kind of interesting because I think one of the things for us that we might eventually start trying to use AI for is more data analytics, kind of doing some business intelligence stuff with AI. But it's like you said, you can't really have AI fill out an inspection report if you're inspecting a sprinkler system. You can't have a robot go out and install a sprinkler system. So I don't want to say we're insulated to AI, because who knows what technology is going to be in 20 years. But I do think right now our industry isn't at risk. Like, I'm not planning to outsource any jobs in the next 10 years to AI right now, because there's just like no one can do it.
So if anything, it'd be more of a helper or an aid for people on the back end for reports or reporting or something from that. But it definitely wouldn't be any robots going out there to install fire prevention. That would be good.
Yeah, it would be kind of crazy. So yeah, we've had a lot of conversations actually about what opportunities there are with AI, and mostly it's office stuff. Can we get AI to help automate some of our repetitive tasks? Can we get AI to do some data analytics for us? But at the end of the day, and even like with something like billing, which is kind of repetitive, or something like payables is kind of repetitive. Like, my billing and my payables people are incredible. Like, I'm not replacing them with an AI that I can't hold accountable, when I got these people that do that job really, really well. And the billing can get complicated.
As you said, when it's not just the work when it comes to accounting or AP, AR, or anything like that, it's the accountability that a human being has to be there and take responsibility for. And you can trust the person, the person. I mean, I could never imagine that happening in the future. And again, I don't know, it was happening in the future, but I really don't foresee that happening. You got to have humans part of the process, I guess.
Well, and it's funny, I think about the industry as a whole, and I'm like, AI is getting used a lot for audits. And I'm like, yeah, but eventually auditors are just going to be like auditing the results of the AI audit, right? Because you have to have some level of human interaction there. Because like you can't tell me, like, if Amazon publishes a report and their 10K is like, oh, this was audited by XYZ AI. I'm like, dude, I don't trust that. How do I know that report's accurate at all right now? Like, no, I want to see PwC or Deloitte or whatever on your 10K if you're a big publicly traded company, because those are the brands.
Because I started as a CPA in New York. You had to have 2 years experience in tax and either 18 months or 2 years in audit. I was a tax guy, so I didn't do any audits. It took me about 5 years to get my experience after I got my CPA just for the audit side. I think we used like a random number generator sample. So if you had like 500 AI or ARAP, you put a random number sampler in there. That was that was the AI of the time back in the 90s, I think, or 2000s. Like, oh, we're putting the random number sampler thing, and we're going to do 26, or we're going to audit, the invoice number 1526 and 1121 and whatever. Like, that was our idea of AI back then.
I remember when the first time I had to select for like an inventory sample, and he was like, do a completely random sample. I'm like, oh, great. And so I just did like an Excel. I like took the inventory listing. I did like an Excel rand between like 1 and 250. And then I copied and pasted the values and sorted it from 1 to 50, because it was a 50 item sample. And that's funny, because I was just like, that's kind of how I remember doing it too. And I see all this talk about like AI replacing, accountants. And I'm like, I'm not saying it's never going to happen. I just don't see how, because like, even for a small company like us, having a good accounting manager, having a good billing person, having a good receivables person, and a good payables person, I'm like, I'm a pretty smart person, but I can't outsource that to an AI right now.
You can't. It's a professionalism. It's the knowledge. It's the human connection. It's not just, okay, like we used to call them code heads, people that know code section of the IRS. Sure, that's great. but they had a place in the CPA firm. You go to him to ask the questions, but he wasn't running the firm. He wasn't running all the audits. He was there to give the information, and obviously an extremely important part of the team, but you can't have that kind of person running a firm or doing accounting work. It's just, that's just too impersonal, and it wouldn't fit the whole model of how accounting works. There's no way I'd trust the work. I just wouldn't.
Well, and I use AI. I use AI. It's funny because I use AI for primarily for like writing memos or stuff like that. And then it's funny because I feel like, if we're working on policy memos right now, we're kind of formalizing some of our policy documentation, which my predecessor had never done. And I'm like, yeah, we're probably going to use Chat GPT for some of this. But then at the end of the day, like every reference the Chat GPT gives to like the accounting standards codification, like I'm going to go back and manually check those because I still don't trust it, even though I know that like it's kind of there, it's getting there.
1,000%. We're doing SOPs and at our office too, and getting all our standard procedures all set up. And I'm like, yeah, anything that references anything, and if you use Chat GPT or whatever it is, AI, to say. But I'm like, yeah, I'm checking everything. I'm not going to trust that this thing's spitting out information. It doesn't know what it's talking about. You got to have someone there to check what's happening. It's there as an assistant, not as a driver. That's great. So we talked a lot about that, and I figured I wanted to take some time now to talk about you, just you individually, kind of like how you grew up and before you had the job in this, and just kind of give me a little bit about your background, your family, as much as you want to talk about. It'd be great to learn about you.
Yeah, sure. So, I grew up in Indiana. I actually went to Indiana University. So if you hadn't heard of us before, the football team is making some waves right now, and just thrashed Alabama. And I can't believe that's reality that we live in, where IU football beat Alabama in the Rose Bowl. But here we are in 2026, and that did actually happen. So, so I'm from Indiana. Grew up in a kind of upper middle class family. I was always in that kind of pool that's like college isn't optional. You're going to go to college and you're going to study something, business, law, medicine, engineering. That was basically those four. Pick one, whichever one suits your fancy the most. Yeah, that's what you're doing. So I studied accounting, did my MBA at Indiana as well. And then I actually started at KPMG in their transaction services group. So I was there for about 4 years, working all around transactions. I did a year of financial due diligence, and then I ended up in the accounting advisory group. But it wasn't their like technical accounting advisory, like accounting standards changes. We were doing like AAS for M&A. So we were doing mergers and post-merge and integrations, and there was a bunch of that. I did that for about 4 years. Decided I really wanted to kind of broaden my exposure into FP&A. So I took a job with CBiz, who is actually a Cleveland company. At the time I was living in
Is that REITs and real estate, CBiz?
Yeah, they do some real estate. CBiz is a big conglomerate now. So they went around, one of their growth strategies was to go around and buy up a bunch of like other accounting firms before it was like the vogue thing to do. And now PE's in there and doing all that. I actually started with a group that had recently been acquired by CBiz, and they were doing strategic FP&A, and it was part of their kind of like private equity advisory is what they called it. And so that was their diligence group. They did some accounting or controllership type work for mid-level private equity. And my group was more like, so think about private equity company, they have a fund, they go out, they buy a platform company, and they do 5 or 6 add-ons. Well, when you buy a bunch of small companies and you smush them together, a lot of times you don't have the like financial firepower for someone to like manage the consolidated entity. So my group would come in, we'd do the budgets and the reporting, we'd build out a forecasting process, and we'd kind of run that until they got the person in the seat that like, okay, this is going to be our like head of finance for this consolidated entity. And then we transition our work off. And that was where I got a lot of exposure to the finance stuff that I have. It's where I learned how to build budgets effectively. It's where I learned how to do forecasting, and, how do you build a forecasting model that not only is semi-reliable, but actually has driven all the way down to the appropriate cost and revenue drivers. How do you build a model where I can tweak some assumptions about headcount or revenue or breaking into a new market and have that actually update your forecast? So I did that for 2 years, and then got picked up by Houlihan Lokey, was there for about a year, took a job with a client, And then after about a year of working in industry it was a big real estate investment company. I went out on my own. I was out on my own for 2.5 years before taking this job. So I met the owners of this company when I was sitting on a small business board in 2023. They brought me in at the beginning of 2025 to just help do some consulting. And then after, 4 or 5 months, they offered me a full-time job as the CFO. And I was like, yeah, I'm interested in what this company's doing, how they're trying to grow. Obviously, the culture there was a big draw because I saw, yeah, I saw the way the family was really involved in the business and, trying to do the right things, even though it may not be the most profitable thing. And that was really attractive to me. Um, and then other than that, I just try.
Siblings at all? Like growing up, did you have any brothers or sisters or anything?
Well, I have a big blended family. So my parents separated when I was young and both got remarried. I've got, if you count all my step siblings and my half siblings and all that, I have 11 brothers and sisters.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
There was a time in my life when I was young where it was my mom and my stepdad, and then there were 9 kids total because it was my 3 step siblings from my stepdad, my three like me and my 2 sisters, and then they had 2 kids together, and then my oldest stepsister had a kid when she was 18, and so there was all those kids. Yeah, 9 of us and my mom and my stepdad all living under one roof. So like very much like real life Brady Bunch. Yes, yeah.
I was just literally getting that Brady Bunch image, that little front street. Oh my gosh. Wow. And did you grow up with your mom, or were you young enough when they divorced? Were you with your mom when you grew up, or your dad?
Yeah, it was both. I lived with my mom until high school, and then my mom actually moved to Indianapolis from my hometown, and I wanted to stay in my hometown, so I moved in with my dad and went to high school in Marion, went to Indiana, and that was kind of a no brainer for me. I knew I wanted to study business, and Indiana's got a great business school. It was in state, and I got some scholarships, so it was like, well, that just makes the most sense for me. And so, yeah, it was interesting. It was quite an interesting family dynamic to grow up in. And then when I was living with my dad, it was just like most of my older siblings had gone on, and my younger siblings still live with my mom. So at one point it went from like me and 8 other siblings and my parents to like when I was a senior in high school, it was just me and my dad and my stepmom. And I was like, this is different. So
That must have been a total lifestyle change for you. That's trying to like going from who's gonna get in to get the most food quick, get into the helpings when you got eight siblings to like.
yeah, my dad used to joke though. He used to joke. He was like, "Well, there was only 3 of us living in the house, but we always cooked for 6 because you ate so much." And I think that there's probably some truth to that.
Is that how they say it? Something like that. He eats the fastest, eats the mostest.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing! Wow, that is amazing. The family dynamic and so many family. A lot of your family still up in Indiana, or are they all around the place or all over the place?
Yeah, we've spread out a little bit. I still have a big chunk of family in Indiana. My dad still lives in my hometown. So do a couple of my siblings. I've got some family down in Florida now. My sisters kind of fled the winters and went down to Florida for college. One of them stayed down there. I actually live in Ohio now, near one of my other sisters. And so yeah, it's funny because I feel like for as young as I am, I've experienced a lot of the different kind of flavors of life. Very very grateful for that.
When you have older siblings, even one older sibling, you get to experience a lot. But when you have as many as you do, it's almost like, yeah, I've seen
And
it.
I'm the dead center of 11. I have 5 older and 5 younger siblings when you count them all up and split them all up. And so that I got to experience, being an older brother and being a younger brother.
Both good and bad, I'm sure.
And now it's funny because I have a job that I like. I like the company I work for a lot. Would love to get a little bit more in with the times in terms of flexible working arrangements, but that's an ongoing discussion between myself, the rest of the management team, and our employees. But other than that, it's a pretty good gig. And like I said earlier, I joke with my friends. I'm like, I've got one of the easiest CFO jobs in the country. We have a great cash conversion cycle. We've got a strong balance sheet. Like, a lot of my job is just doing the reporting and making sure that we're, executing the strategy elements that we want to, within the bounds of what we can afford. And then, of course, a little bit of managing the family and, talking to you being the business expert in the room sometimes, but it's a good gig. And then
It's hard a lot of times because sometimes you're having to fight against, not you don't, I'm not saying you, but sometimes you have to fight against the management ideology. If it's not accounting centric, if they don't understand accounting, or if they're not focused on the employees, you're like, why is there so much fighting? I'm the professional in the room on this stuff, and you guys are fighting back on me. It can be a frustrating task, just that alone. So that's great you landed at the company you did. Actually,
Yeah, it can be.
do you want to talk more about the company? I thought I'd give you a chance now to either talk about whatever you wanted to do to promote yourself, or your business you work for, wherever you wanted to do. Kind of let everybody know how to get a hold of you, and what area you're in, everything.
Yeah, definitely. So if you're in the Cleveland area, if you're in Northeast Ohio, actually, I would say down as far south as Columbus, we'd be happy to take a call and figure out how we can help you if you need any fire safety advice or fire safety prevention work done. You can always call our office. We're located in Brooklyn, which is right outside of Cleveland. You can visit our website, gpsfire.com. We have a ton of we've got a ton of work coming in, but we're always looking for new clients. We're always looking to make sure that we're providing advice if people call in, and so that's great. As for me personally, I'm just you can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on Substack. You can look at my Substack's a little more personal than my LinkedIn. I've published some essays about things that I like to think about, philosophy, theology, business, how crazy it is sometimes to just be a conscious human in 2026. Yeah, it's I like thinking about all that stuff. And
That's amazing. Right now, a lot of times people are kind of surface level. Is doom scrolling, is that a word? I'm trying to think if I got the right word or not. But doom scrolling all the time, and it's all surface level. But there's a lot of a lot of lost art in philosophy, and thinking about things deeper. So that's great you're doing that.
yeah, I actually love to listen to philosophy podcasts too. And I watch a lot of like Alex O'Connor, who's a philosopher. He's an Oxford trained like philosophy theology guy, and I just find that stuff really fascinating. Not even because like I'm like overly religious myself, but just because I think there's a lot of value in thinking about what are you doing here? And it's funny because I've asked a bunch of people, like, what do you feel like is the why behind it being a human? And a lot of people like don't even think about it. They're like, I don't know. I woke up one day and I'm a human. And I'm like, yeah, but why? Like, do you even care at all about what you're doing here? And
It is literally the old adage of why and what's the purpose, what's my, it was, I was going to reference another movie with Steve Martin, The Jerk. It's like, what's my special purpose? What am I here for?
and I don't know that I have a great answer. I try to, I'm trying to keep my nose down, do a good job at the work that I've been, that I get paid for. I'm trying to be a good husband to my wife. I'm trying to, spoil my dogs as much as I can in the 10 years that I've got them around. Trying to practice like being a loving person, which I think is really important, no matter what your views are, what your theology is like, just try to put more love into the world than suffering, and try to be more empathetic than prejudice. So I talk about that stuff a lot with people. And then I think for me, it's fun too. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people like they get like, I don't want to say nihilistic, but they start thinking about like, why is there something rather than nothing? I'm like, I'd go out into my backyard, like right here behind me, and at night, and I just look up at the stars, and I'm like, man, the universe, that is a huge thing. And like,
You could literally spin out, like looking out or thinking about infinity or thinking about the stars. I gotta sit down for a minute because your head starts wobbling. You're like, what in the world? It's so much more vast than you realize. And
and like, dude, and I'm a human being who goes to work on a Wednesday morning and looks at spreadsheets for 6 hours a day, and then I come home and I'm like, oh wait, like what else is going on in the universe? Like, but and it's just for me, it's fun to think about. It's fun to ask the question, and you know, I whatever you do believe, here's the reality. Like, if you're listening to this podcast, you're alive in 2026, and you're like a person in 2026, and that's just part of it. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when you either just coast through life, or you don't considering the world is a suffering world. It just is, and you can contribute to it or you can alleviate it. And if you never care about that, you're never going to choose.
Yeah, and focusing on people, I think, is the real big part. Is a lot of people lose that art of like, they're so quick to judge online. Then when you get in reality, they treat people the same way. It's like, no, that's not how. Just so quick to judge and so quick to make opinions. No, you need to dial it back a little bit and be empathetic. Empathetic, that's probably a good word.
Yeah, yeah, empathetic, and it's I even catch myself doing it. I play a lot of online chess. That's one of my like hobbies when I'm just trying to like decompress. And I'll get mad that I'm losing a chess game, and I'll like type out a snarky message, and I'll be like, "Wait, hold on, is that something that's loving to do, or are you just about to are you about to take out your frustration on some other human being who's just like over there doing the same thing?" And sometimes I catch myself, and sometimes I don't, but
It is. We're human after all. We have to do things like that. But you're right. If you catch it and do it from a place of love, say, look, my bad, or whatever it is.
And sometimes I actually like have that moment and I like completely reverse course. I'm like, man, that was a great game. You had a great find like that. When I hung my knight and I didn't even notice it until 3 moves later. And, sometimes you can turn that around. I try to focus too, you're married, right? And, so how it goes. You fight with your spouse, and you want to like run away and just be furious because you're not on the exact same page as your spouse. And like sometimes I'll be like driving to work. I'll like tiff with my wife in the morning, and I'll be driving to work, and I'll be like sitting in the parking lot. I'm like, Zach, you have to like stop and like choose to love your wife right now. I'm like, text her, tell her you still love her, like apologize for being a jerk if I did it. Those are the things.
You don't want to go to bed when you're mad at somebody. That sunset rule, or whatever they call it. It's hard though sometimes. This is really challenging me. This is really stressing me out. Why? You're like, please, somebody help me.
Well, and it's really hard when you fight right before bed, and you're like laying in bed next to this person, and I'm like turned away from her, like on my phone, like doing whatever I'm doing. And you roll over and you're like, baby, I'm sorry, I love you. You like give her a kiss and a hug. And you're like, those are choices that matter in terms of just like, how are you going to live your life? And then it's interesting because one of the things I've noticed is the more I focus on it, the easier it is to like not fall into the trap of like being an anonymous jerk online, or, being quicker to apologize than I probably was 5 years ago. And, it's not that my wife and I never fight. It's not that I never say nasty things. But, I get up and try to be better the next day. And I think that's really important too. And that's part of what drives me to like, be good at my job and continue to excel, because I could sleepwalk through being a senior accountant somewhere. But as a senior accountant, you don't really get to make decisions that impact employees. You don't get to talk to, owners who get to make decisions about impacting employees. You don't get to strategize about, is my company going to be better for my employees next year or not? And so I love those parts of my job.
That's the attitude. It'd be better for your employees. And that's great. It sounds like you have that and the owners have it. So together, that synergy is going to help everybody around you. And that's how it works. A little bit from each person. Everybody has their own little part in the whole pond of life, or the pool of life, whatever it is. And that makes a difference. So that's great.
Well, and I actually spent a lot of time in transactions in the early parts of my career. And one of the things I asked the owners, because fire safety, huge in transactions right now, lots of private equity activity. And I just asked him after I took the job, I was like, why don't you want to sell the company? He's like, it's like, Zach, there's 70 people that work in this organization that depend on this company for their livelihoods. I don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize that. And I was just like, wow, that is really like, that's a really, really telling mindset for like just how these people want to be with their employees. And don't get me wrong, they're not perfect. Sometimes I have to like walk out of the office and call my wife and be like, you will not believe what happened at work today. But
that's it. It's how you react to things. It's not that things won't happen to you. It's your part in control of reacting to it. And that is where we got to catch ourselves. And that's great. You do that. This has been great. I'm so glad we spent time today. I really appreciate it. I know my listeners will appreciate it. So I wanted to say thank you.
It's been fantastic. Yeah. Feel free if anyone's listening wants to find me on LinkedIn, Zachary Roper. I work for GPS Fire. I'm located in Cleveland. You can find me on Substack. You can shoot me a message if you need fire protection services, or you just need to discuss something that, maybe this conversation like triggered in your brain. Give us a call. We'd be happy to help you out. I'd be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. Craig, thank you so much for having me, by the way. This was awesome. It's been great getting to know you as we've chatted leading up to this, and I'm glad I got to join for an episode.
And I'm looking at the time. I'm thinking, boy, it must have been on the phone for 5 or 10 minutes. We're almost an hour. It just time flew by so fast. It's a great conversation. I really enjoyed. Thank you so much, and everybody, I'll talk to you in the next episode.
Sounds great. Take care, Craig.
Behind Closed Books podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.